Pedro sat quietly on the bus, headphones in, shoulders slumped. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, like, and share this video. He had just had another rough day, maybe the worst one yet. The job interview he had pinned all his hopes on ended with a polite rejection, and the weight of his mom's worsening health was starting to crush him. He stared blankly out the window, deep in thought, as the bus rolled through the city, picking up more passengers at every stop. He didn't even notice how crowded it had become until he saw an elderly woman step on board. What caught his attention wasn't just her frail figure, but the complete indifference of the people around her. Not a single person moved. They were all glued to their phones or pretending not to see her. Pedro sighed. He may have been having a terrible day, but his manners weren't gone. Without thinking twice, he stood and gently tapped the old lady on the arm. "Would you like my seat, ma'am?" The woman's eyes lit up with gratitude. She smiled warmly and accepted. Pedro didn't know it yet, but this one simple act of kindness would change the course of his entire life. As the bus continued, Pedro struggled to remain standing among the packed commuters. Just as the vehicle lurched to a stop, he braced himself and began maneuvering toward the door, pushing past shoulders and bags. That's when he felt a gentle tug at his jacket. He turned slightly, just in time to see the old woman slip something into his pocket. Startled and confused, Pedro stepped off the bus and watched it drive away. He reached into his pocket and found a small folded note. Unfolding it, he expected a thank you message or maybe a token of appreciation. Instead, it was a strange, scribbled code, 659-724. At first, he thought it might be a phone number or just random numbers, but then he noticed something else on the back of the paper. Written in different handwriting were the words, "Visit Lakeshore Drive 6002 at 8:0. Pedro stared at the message. Puzzled, the address didn't ring any bells. Was this a mistake? Had she meant to give it to someone else? His instincts told him to forget it, to throw the note away and head home. But curiosity had a stronger grip. He had about 2 hours to kill, so he found a small restaurant nearby to grab dinner. As he ate, he wrestled with his thoughts. Should he go? Could he trust it? What if it was a trap? But there was something in the old woman's sincerity, maybe even hope, that kept pulling him back. Eventually, he decided to find out. By the time he reached the address, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the quiet street. The location turned out to be a modest apartment building. He climbed the steps and hesitated in front of the door. No doorbell, just a keypad. And then it clicked. The code 659,724. He entered the numbers slowly. After a few tense moments, there was a soft click, followed by the sound of movement inside. The door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was the same elderly woman from the bus, smiling as if she'd been expecting him. Pedro stepped inside, overwhelmed with questions. She offered him tea and motioned for him to sit. He didn't even let her reach the kitchen. "Why did you give me that note?" he asked bluntly. The woman who introduced herself as Meredith paused, then smiled again. She told Pedro that she had overheard him on the phone during the bus ride. He had been speaking to his father, pleading for help with his mother's medicine. She had heard the tension in his voice, the heartbreak, and the desperation. She had felt it. Pedro flinched. That call was private. He hadn't expected anyone to listen, let alone act on it. "I'm sorry if it felt invasive," Meredith said gently. "But I've been looking for someone." Pedro was confused. "Looking for someone? For what?" Meredith went quiet for a moment, then said, "To leave everything I own to." The room fell still. Pedro blinked. "What?" Meredith went on to explain that she had lived alone for years. She had no family, no one to care for her or her legacy, but she didn't want her life's earnings to disappear without purpose. She had been looking for someone who showed kindness, not for a reward, but because it was the right thing to do. "You stood up for me when no one else did," she said. "You reminded me of something the world is forgetting. Empathy." Pedro sat in stunned silence. Everything she said was too surreal. It felt like a movie. Then she leaned closer and offered to pay for his mother's treatment right then and there. But Pedro's heart sank. As tempting as it was, he couldn't accept. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't think I can take something so big from someone I just met." Instead of being disappointed, Meredith smiled even wider. "Then let me offer you a challenge," she said. "If you prove to me you're the right person not just once, but by living it then you'll earn it." Pedro was speechless. This was no longer just a thank you. It was the beginning of something he never saw coming. Pedro left Meredith's apartment that evening with a strange mixture of disbelief and determination. He wasn't just handed a reward, was handed a purpose, and for the first time in weeks he felt hopeful. But now came the real test. How would he prove himself? That night, Pedro thought hard about what truly mattered to Meredith. It wasn't money, fame, or some flashy gesture. It was kindness, empathy, and genuine action. That's when it hit him. He had to go back to the moment that started it, all his small act of kindness. That was the key. The next morning, Pedro called Meredith. He didn't explain much, just asked her to meet him. Curious and slightly amused, she agreed. When she arrived, Pedro took her by the hand and led her through the city streets until they arrived at a local retirement home. "Don't worry," he chuckled. "I'm not dropping you off here." Instead, he brought her inside as his guest, sat her down at a table, and began mingling with the elderly residents. He fetched coffee, played cards, and even helped one gentleman fix his glasses. He wasn't just volunteering, he was uplifting spirits. Meredith watched from across the room, her eyes misty. She could see it. Pedro wasn't doing this to impress her. He was doing it because it felt right. Later that day, as Pedro wrapped up a game of dominoes, a man in a suit approached him. He introduced himself as the manager of the facility. Word of Pedro's kindness had already spread, and the staff were impressed. "I know this is sudden," the manager said, "but we'd love to offer you a position here. You have a natural gift." Pedro was stunned. A job? A steady income? This was exactly what he needed to help his mother, and he hadn't even asked for it. He turned to Meredith to tell her the news. She didn't look surprised. "I told you," she said with a smile. "You were the right person all along." Time passed. Pedro thrived in his new role, and Meredith continued visiting the retirement home, eventually moving in. The two formed a powerful bond, part friendship, part mentorship, part family. A few years later, Meredith passed away peacefully in her sleep. Pedro was devastated, but he was also deeply grateful. He arranged her funeral and made sure her memory was honored. And then, days later, he received a letter. It was from Meredith's lawyer. In it was her final message and her final gift. She had kept her word. Pedro was officially the sole beneficiary of her estate. Through one simple gesture on a crowded bus, Pedro's life had changed forever. But more than the money or the inheritance, what truly mattered was the connection he had made, the values he had rediscovered, and the legacy of kindness he now carried forward. Because sometimes the smallest acts unlock the biggest doors.